In a situation of ethical dilemma, what would you rely on more? Your values or ethical theories? Let's explore. I remember last month I was doing a leadership workshop for officers from Arunachal Pradesh. It was a leadership workshop. And I was just discussing leadership competencies. And one of the competencies that came up was decision making. And there also specifically they spoke about ethical decision making. And my question to a lot of these officers was this: do you use theories to decide, or do you rely on values to decide more? And surprisingly, what they said is they rely more on service values. So what they said is it's the values which actually helps them in a situation of ethical dilemma, along with rules, of course, along with procedures, along with the norms. It's also the values that they rely on for making ethical decisions. And today in this episode, I will be discussing about values. There are some core values which have been identified by scholars, which are normally used by us and by professionals also, whenever there's a situation of dilemma. So in other words, it's not ethical theories alone. It's also the values which can be used to sort out ethical dilemmas. Or to put in other words also, when you're doing your case studies, it's not necessarily you have to rely only on ethical theories. You can also use your values, values to substantiate your points of view, or you can use values as a guide to get out of a situation of dilemma. Before we get into the values which actually help us in a situation of dilemma, let's understand what values mean. In fact, it's very difficult to define the word values. There are a lot of definitions that goes around. But for our purpose, for this episode's purpose, we look at three parts here. We'll define values in the following manner: anything capable of being appreciated. Secondly, the object of any need. Thirdly, normative standards by which human beings are influenced in their choice among the alternative course of action which they perceive. In simple words, values are core beliefs of something that is intrinsically desirable. Or in simple words, values are something that we feel is very important to us, something that really matters to us. And since it matters to us, since it's very important to us, these values, or the values we hold, they drive our decisions. They drive our reasoning. So that's why values can be a great help when you have to resolve ethical dilemmas. Over the years, scholars and ethicists from different professional fields, right from bioethics to engineering to public administration ethics, have identified 10 basic values, or I should say 10 crucial values that actually can help us in resolving ethical dilemmas. Now we'll explore these 10 values in detail. The first most important value which all scholars agreed upon is caring. Oh, talking about caring, we all are exposed to caring right from the moment we are born. We are cared for by the family. And with time, we start to care about the world that's around us. We care for our friends. We care for our pets. We care for relatives. We care for our family. So caring. And caring is a very important value. Why? Because caring displays that you're respecting the other person, that you're sensitive. It shows that you don't intend to use other human being as means. In fact, it shows that you respect the other human being. In fact, caring is a basic foundation on which the basic emotion of compassion is built up. And in public services, you're expected to care. You're expected to care for citizens. That's why caring. And in fact, if you look at all professions, for example, if you're an engineer, as an engineer, you have to learn to care for safety. Suppose you're a doctor, you have to learn to care for your patients. So that is why caring is the most important value. Second, when you're developing options out of a dilemma, when you're looking for a way out of dilemma, you should always ensure that you don't deceive others. That is, your actions should not be deceptive. That's where honesty comes in. Every single decision you take can either build your trust or you may end up losing trust. So that's why when you're looking for a way out of a dilemma, remember to be honest. Remember to practice honesty. Otherwise, you end up being deceitful. Otherwise, you end up being a kind of a cheat, which I'm sure none of us would like to be. So second value, which is very important in a situation of ethical dilemma, is honesty. One has to be honest. Our action should reflect our honesty. Okay, let me put it this way. There's a situation of dilemma and you decide on a course of action which is sensitive and which is honest. And suppose while pursuing the course of action, something goes wrong. Would you take the blame or would you pass on the blame on somebody else? Now that is what is called accountability. That is taking the blame on your own self if something goes wrong. In other words, one should be answerable for the choices made. It's a very important value because in life, whenever we make a choice, we should be accountable instead of putting the blame on somebody else. So that's a third value one has to keep in mind. Acha, these values are not random, but you can see the small connection. I am sensitive, I am honest, but something goes wrong. Better be accountable. And normally I've seen in my experience when people do case studies or when people have dilemma situations, they take a call, they take a decision, but they refrain from taking accountability, which is not right. Because you made the choice, you better be accountable. Just imagine a situation. An old lady who has no bona fide documents, no documentary proof of residence, no Aadhaar card, no voter ID card, and she comes to a VAO or a block development officer's office just to avail benefit of a certain scheme. And you as an officer in charge understand her plight, understand her distress. But at the same time, you also realize that this lady has no documents to prove her bona fides. But she really needs your help. So seeing her pitiable condition, you decide to help her. You made a small commitment to help her. And once you make a commitment, you have to uphold that commitment. Now that's the next big value I'm talking about, which is called promise keeping. Fulfilling your commitments. In every dilemma, in every case study that the UPSC gives you, will have multiple stakeholders. And when you make a decision, your decision will impact a lot of stakeholders. And at the same time, every action of yours is a kind of a commitment. Like here in the earlier case that I narrated, you made a small commitment to that lady that you'll help her out. Fulfill that commitment. If you don't fulfill that commitment, that means you're reneging from promise. You're not keeping your promises. So it's a very, very important value to be followed in a situation of dilemma. Promise keeping, fulfilling commitments. Otherwise, what happens is, if you don't fulfill your commitments, the trust quotient erodes. People lose trust in you. In fact, your solutions to a dilemma should build trust, not erode trust. Okay, in a situation dilemma, you have identified a course of action. You've decided that, okay, I will be doing this. I'll be taking this path. I'll be walking down this road. When you're doing that, you better be diligent. You better ensure that you take care of all the minute details because you cannot make a mistake. That's the next value. That is pursuit of excellence. Whatever course of action you choose, do it to the best of your abilities. So the next value is about pursuit of excellence. For example, if you're solving somebody's problem, do it diligently. Do it meticulously. Do it to the best of your abilities. You know why this becomes very important is because normally we humans have this thing. Suppose you choose a course of action and when you don't do it properly, you have a little bit of a guilt factor because suddenly you realize, oh, I could have done this better. So if you do things to the best of your abilities, you will not have that slight guilt tinge in you that, oh, I could have done this better. It's always good to avoid this guilt. That's why one has to pursue a course of action diligently. So the next important value is loyalty to your departmental goals, loyalty to your organizational values. For example, suppose you're a Delhi police officer. So whatever decisions you take should also show your commitment to the departmental values of Seva, Shanti and Nyay. It's very important. Please remember something, you're not taking decisions for yourself, you're taking decisions on behalf of a certain department or an institution or an organization. So that's why whatever course of action that you take should also reflect your departmental goals, should also reflect your organizational values. So that's what is called loyalty here. Humans have this innate tendency to be a little partial. For example, that's why we have different categories of friends. Your best friends. Why they are friends? Because you're a little partial towards them. So that's why whatever course of action that you take should reflect your ability to be fair. So the next big value that we need to talk about is fairness. Fairness means you're not discriminating. You're not taking sides. When I say fairness, that means you don't have favorites. You're impartial. As a professional police officer, as a professional administrator, as a professional revenue service officer, you have to be impartial. You have to be fair to everybody. You cannot indulge in discrimination. You cannot be nepotistic. You cannot be, you cannot play favorites. So that is what fairness is all about. So fairness comes into play when you're implementing the course of action. For example, when you're implementing a course of action, you cannot be partial towards certain section of population. You cannot be partial to a certain interest group. You cannot be partial to a certain political party with an ideology. You cannot be partial towards a certain linguistic group. So you have to play fair. You have to play by rules. And playing by rules involves being fair. We all have some basic values, or we all have some basic rules of living which are non-negotiable. For example, Mahatma Gandhi had two big values, Ahimsa and Satya. He never compromised with those two values. Now that non-compromising with values, or in other words, being committed to your convictions, basic convictions, is called integrity. So integrity also is reflected in your actions. It's also reflected in your behavior. When I say reflecting your behavior, that means, suppose a value, your personally held value, your conviction is being violated in the course of a certain action. You stand up for those values because you cannot see your values being compromised. That is what integrity is all about. Integrity is also reflecting your moral courage. You should have the courage to pursue a certain course of action which reflects your values. That is integrity. By the way, I plan to do a complete episode on integrity. Do watch out for that. The next big value is called respect for persons. When I talk about respect for persons, it's not about respecting the dignity of the person, but also it's about being courteous. It's about showing, just imagine somebody comes to your office, the minimum the other person expects from you is courtesy. The minimum the other person expects from you is to be heard. People come to government offices to be heard. And listening to somebody is the best way to show that you respect the other person. That's the one aspect of respecting other persons. Second aspect of respecting other person, when somebody comes and shares information with you, as officers, as government doctors, you have access to enormous amount of personal information. Respecting that personal information is also known as respecting the other person. So respect for persons implies you are courteous, you're not being rude, you're courteous, you're willing to listen. In other words, you're willing to be empathetic, very important. And lastly, you're willing to respect the other person's privacy. Now comes the most important one. In all of this, I have never mentioned that we all are citizens of a country. Now, as a citizen, the most important value your course of action or your decision should reflect is the values of responsible citizenship. This is what is called civic virtue. Your decision cannot reflect something which is against our constitutional morality. Your decision cannot reflect something which erodes our democratic values, which erodes the basic essence of a constitution. So the next value happens to be responsible citizenship. This value of responsible citizenship becomes very important public service. Why? Because when you become officers, you're not only officers, you're also citizens at the same time. So you become the guardians of civic values. You become guardians of constitutional values. So whatever decisions you take in a situation of ethical dilemma should reflect the constitutional values. I have listed out 10 values, and all these values are difficult to remember in one go. That's why I'll help you out here. I'll give you a small mnemonic, and the mnemonic happens to be chapel phrase. You remember the mnemonic, you remember the values. Okay, one bit of advice here. I've given you 10 values. You cannot use all the 10 values in every dilemma. You have to be very selective. When I say selective, you have to first prioritize. In this dilemma or in this case study, what should I reflect? Should I reflect my human values more? Should I reflect my human tendencies more? Should I come across a sensitive person? Then you go with caring. Then you go with respect for persons. Suppose there'll be some cases where you want to be more official. There you can go with values such as loyalty to departmental goals. You can go with values such as responsible citizenship. So you can choose the values that you would like to use in a dilemma situation. Along with the values, I'll list out some thumb rules, and these are thumb rules which are tried and tested in administrative situations. And these thumb rules will actually help you in administrative dilemma cases. And if you look at civil service exams, if you look at GS paper 4, most of these dilemmas are from administrative situations. So these thumb rules will be very, very handy when you're dealing with administrative dilemma cases. The first thumb rule: consider the well-being of others. The key word is well-being of others. Whatever decision you take should be considerate of others' well-being, because well-being matters. The ultimate goal of governance is to care. And when I say care, it's about caring for the emotional, physical, moral well-being of citizens, moral well-being of human beings. So whatever decision you take should reflect that care, should reflect that care for well-being. In a situation of dilemma, whenever you take a decision, you have to keep one thing in mind, that the decisions you're taking are not on your behalf. You have to keep a larger perspective. You have to think of yourself as a member of a community. You have to think of yourself as a member of a department, as a member belonging to a certain institution, or a member of an organization. That matters. This will give you a broader perspective. In other words, when you start looking at yourself in a decision-making situation as a member of a community or a member of a larger group, your decision becomes much more broad-based. By the way, advice. When you start looking at yourself as a member of a community, your stakeholder analysis becomes much, much better. Keep that in mind. Third thumb rule: obey the law. When I say obey the law, it does not mean blind obedience. You can use rationality, you can use your own reasoning abilities, but try to be a responsible citizen. Try to ensure that the options you choose or the actions you take reflects your civic virtues. It shows that you are a responsible and a committed citizen. Imagine in a situation of dilemma, you choose a certain course of action, you choose to walk a certain path. And because of the course of action, you land up in the front page of newspapers and national news channels for wrong reasons. Can you imagine how will your family feel? So that's the next thumb rule. Whatever course of action that you take should enhance your virtue. You should come across as a moral exemplar, not a person of questionable character. So always remember, whatever decision you take, whatever action you pursue should never ever compromise your character, because your character is precious. So that's the next thumb rule. Now the last thumb rule, and a very important one. India is a multilingual country with a lot of diversity, and diversity in terms of customs and practices. So, in other words, in a situation of ethical dilemma, whatever course of action you pursue, while pursuing that course of action, you have to learn to respect others' customs. You have to learn to respect others' diversities. That's a very important rule of thumb. Oh, by the way, when I say respecting others' customs does not mean you end up compromising with your ethics. So remember this, respecting customs, important, yes, but not at the cost of your personal ethics. In a situation of dilemma, always remember this, there is no one right answer. And in a situation of dilemma, since you have two justifiable options, don't look for one right answer. Try to first understand the dilemma. Try to first identify what are the values at stake. Then you come down to identifying your course of action. When I say course of action, it's actually course of actions. Identify those actions and identify what values those course of actions will respect or what values those course of actions will disrespect or violate. Once you've done this value analysis, then you can zero in on your course of action. That's how you use values approach. Now, in the previous episode, we discussed prescriptive approach of making decisions, which focus on three basic ethical approaches, which were duties, virtues, and consequences. And today I've given you a list of 10 values. Along with that, some thumb rules, which will actually help you to frame answers for case studies. That's all for now. Happy learning.